Our keynote speaker for today is no other person than Down. She's the chair for the PSF, previous sponsored chair for several Django cons, Wagtail core team member, Python community advocate, you should be clapping by now, at Microsoft, and Django software engineer. She lives in Philadelphia, USA with her partner and dogs watching Star Trek and nodding about inclusive tech. With PyCon joy in our eyes, join me as I welcome Dan Wage. Let's give her a round of applause till she gets here.
Hello, everyone. I want this to be an energetic talk. Of all of the Nigerians that I know, they're excellent orators, so I'm just going to keep up the energy and try to embody the best of the best in this room. There's excellent energy in this room, and I'm so happy to be here. Woo! It's the last day of Python Nigeria conference, and I'm so excited to be the last keynote speaker here. Of those who know me, my name's Dawn Wages. I am a Python engineer, and I have been for about a decade. And one of the things that I really wanted to talk about today was about invention. It's about coming up with ideas, it's about getting to those ideas, and really achieving more. And all of you in this room who've come today, you're achievers. You've decided with your feet to walk here, you decided with your butts to sit here, some with your money to pay to be here, for the resources to learn how to code. And so really, I want to understand, what do we need to do to be able to invent? And in my journey, I've really been excited about inventing, but first, I needed to learn how to imitate. So, I am a community manager at Microsoft. That is my day job. That is my 9 to 5. Notes. You know what? I'm going to do it without notes. I know this presentation like the back of my hand. We're good. So I'm a community manager at Microsoft. My bread and butter, my background is in Python. I started out as a Django engineer, and I've eventually gotten into Microsoft. And it's truly like similar stories here in this room. I got to Microsoft because of the community. And it's a tough job to get. I mean, as soon as a job post opens, many of you may know, like thousands of people apply. But it was really the networking and the resources, investing my time, and really trusting the process that got me the connections and the skills that got me ready for this role. I am the chair of the Python Software Foundation. Similarly, in the vein of contributing to the community, that is how I became the chair of the Python Software Foundation. Could anyone who is familiar with what the Python Software Foundation does, or if you know it exists, can you raise your hand? Okay, so let me give a little bit more context. So it does seem like there's a good number of people, but I don't want to leave anybody behind, because all of this is about learning. And when I signed up and joined the Python Software Foundation, I knew about this much. So the PSF and the Python Software Foundation is one of the sponsors of this event. We are the foundation arm in the United States to support the Python language. So there is the core contributors, the code contributors for C Python, and then all of the other workings giving out grants or handling trademarks. We also have fiscal sponsorees for Python projects in the US. Those are things happening by the PSF. But we also really focus a lot on the community and events. So PyCon US, the biggest Python conference in the world, is held by the PSF. Oh, and my role as chair. So my role as chair, we have board meetings every month, and we go through a lot of things, going through our bylaws. It is tedious and a deep process, and it's existed for years, and the lore is deep. So we kind of go through conversations each month, and I am the chair, so I help manage those conversations. And my chief goal is to create equitable conversations and to encourage discourse. I am also an event organizer. Does anyone know Django Not Space in here? Could you raise your hands if you know Django Not Space? Okay, a few hands. It's great. So it's a new program. It's a peer mentorship program. Well, it's a space themed mentorship program, and it started out with peers, but has a very low hierarchy approach. And Django, the Python framework, web framework, is an open source framework, a way for you to code for the web in Python. And in Django Not Space, we are launching leaders in our community. So what you do is you go through an 8-week program. You are a Django Not, kind of like an astronaut, and we have navigators and captains, and you are going through a cohort to become a leader in the community. So you are just not just contributing code, but you can contribute like blog posts and other resources, talking, where you can become a leader in the community. And we help you do that and give you connections in order to do that. So who am I? I started out really not knowing much about Python or engineering or web. I did a little bit of MySpace back in the day, some HTML and CSS when I was in high school. And I was very lucky that I had access to a computer at that age. But it wasn't really at the forefront of my mind that I could make a career out of this, because the people who were making careers out of it didn't look like me and didn't come from the backgrounds that I had. Fast forward, I went through school. I have a business degree, still really didn't get back into coding. And I tried my hand at finance, and I failed miserably. I had a huge letdown at the early part of my career, and I really was looking for what was going to come next and what was going to really challenge me and make me feel smart. I wanted to do something big. I didn't actually care what it was. It was something for my ego and also for my bank account, but mostly my ego. So I've been around for a number of years, and let me tell you what I've learned about our community. And I say our community because you are here right now. This is your community just as much as it is mine. Take ownership of it. Come back. Keep investing yourself and your time into this community, and it will absolutely reap the rewards. And I love the exercise of looking to your left and to your right and talking to your neighbor. That was fantastic. I haven't seen that outside of church, so that's awesome. But like, that's how you make friends and join the community, and I wish I did that more in my first years. So especially if it's your first time here, continue to do that. So we are in a field of makers. There's a common analogy that happens in the community where it's a software carpentry of sorts. I'm not sure if I may be seeing any nods in there about carpentry, but it's very, very similar. It's a skill. You use your hands. You're sitting at your keyboard. You're using your hands many times. And in accessible ways, you can still build without your hands, but we are still building things. But we are different than carpenters because we can do things out in the open, and there are lots of disclaimers coming, so you'll see that. We also create for free, disclaimer coming, and we also are people who change the world. Not quite a disclaimer, but more notes. So when we're creating in the open, many times that means we have our code that is exposed and just other people can see it. It's not always the case. There's proprietary code, but CPython itself is code that is out in the open. And the way that you are able to use Python for free means there is open source code available to you. This means it's all on a code repository, specifically CPython, and most of my code is on GitHub. There's GitLab, Bitbucket, there's other code repositories, but it just means that your code lives on some server and you are able to see the code itself, not just run it, because that lives on a server and that will run, but you can see the code itself. There's also blogging that is very common and an integral part of the community. Most of the most prolific open source contributors will have a blog. And I really recommend that people, even getting started, even if you think that you don't know enough, every step of the way, blog and write about your journey. You will be helping open doors for other people and making it feel more accessible for people who are getting it started right along with you. And it helps you build and balance your comprehension skills. So start blogging. There is dev.to, there's Medium, there's other resources. And even if you're writing and you're not exposing your writing, I think you should put it out in the open. But even if you're not, that practice will be very helpful. There's speaking as well, what I'm doing here on stage. There's absolutely tons of opportunities to talk about your journey, whether it's about the code or not. And then you can also attend sprints. Sprints are a common factor in a lot of Python conferences. It is where people kind of get together, and it's similar and different than the sprint concept in agile software, where you have like a section of time, 2 or 3 week sprints, and you're contributing to milestones and epochs. Similar to that, you have at the end of a conference, there will be open tables. People will gather around tables and then contribute to open source together. It's kind of like a little bit of a hackathon of sorts, but really you're sprinting towards open source contributions. We are also a group of people that create for free. So I mentioned open source. There is a capital O, capital S open source licenses. Are people familiar in here about open source licenses? And can you raise your hand? All right, okay, I'm hearing some people are familiar, but I'll keep going into it. Open source licenses, there are a few organizations that self nominate themselves to be regulators of what is open source. A common one that people are going by today is OSI, the Open Source Initiative, and there's also a list of open source licenses. So if you want to learn a little bit more, you can go to that link. That's how I choose my open source license as I'm learning through the process. But it basically means that you are able to define the parameters at which someone is going to use your code. There is copyleft license, and there's also copyright license, and it also just means that someone's derivative work, so all of the works that come after. So say I make a little piece of code, it's like a little calculator, and it's really important, and it does calculator in a very particular way. Maybe it's in Rust and it's really fast or something like that. And someone wants to use that calculator to build something larger, like, I don't know, a trading app or something like that. And so they are able to do that because I can put in my open source license that I want you can use it for your trading app, but you can't use it for your commercial purposes. You can use it for free, but you can't use it for commercial purposes. And that would be something included in my open source license. I also have ethical source licenses on here. This is not very common, and there's our debates that whether or not it is actually capital O, capital S open source. I have the first, and it was me and a team of people, but in 2020 we created the first anti-racist ethical source license. It is a copyleft license. It means all derivative works that includes this license has to abide by the rules that we put in this license. And that means if I create my little calculator that goes really, really fast and someone puts it in their trading app, but somebody in their trading app is doing something that is explicitly listed in our stipulations and our parameters that is racist by definition, and we have very specific examples in the license. Then we can start with a cease and desist, and we can start doing legal ramifications. And specifically, we have U.S. courts to exercise this and lawyers to exercise this. We can go through the legal ramifications of stopping them from using that code. So that's one of the ways that you can decide in the world whether or not you want the ethics of your code to embody what you'd like it to, but also still have the intellectual property out there so other people can accelerate their development and use your code and continue in that open source life cycle. We're also people who change the world. Who in here wants to change the world? There's a lot of hands. Okay, there's a lot of hands here. We can change the world, and I know you all will. I know of people who have started from very, very humble beginnings and gone to do amazing things. And I'm hoping that I get to meet a lot of you all down the road. And I know also right now there's stories to be discovered. Every time I turn to my right and to my left, I'm learning a new story that's just blowing my mind. And I'm excited to learn about all of you all's stories. I also want to highlight that Python is everywhere. And so the testament to AI being such a huge part of our industry and is changing things. I mean, Microsoft itself is a powerhouse of AI, but we've never really focused too heavily on Python. And we're really changing some of the ways that we're approaching the Python community internally because of these AI initiatives. So Python kind of and its use cases wiggled its way in and is changing the world one multi-billion-dollar company at a time. So how do you invent? This is an approach. This is nothing too special. It's an idea. It's a plan. You learn first. You got to figure out what the foundations are. Then you ideate. So you'll create the dream. Maybe you start with a dream, but after you learn, you're going to refine that dream and really come up with what you want to do next. Then you plan your approach, right? You'll sit down maybe with a pen and a paper, or maybe it stays all in your head, and you'll make a plan on how you get there, and then you build. And that target at the end, that target is building something. In this use case, it's going to be very general. It's going to just build something that's never existed before. But what do you learn? That's really hard to approach. How do I learn? What do I learn? And then this part, I guess, is all of the invent. That's a whole bunch of steps over there. That's really hard too. But what do you need to know when you learn? It's tough to figure out where the line is and what that list is going to be. How do I get good enough? What even is good enough? Does good enough even exist? What does that mean? And what do you need to do before you can get to the ideation stage? Well, I like to learn through imitation. And I think there is a research-backed foundation on learning through imitation. And there's lots of opportunities for you to be able to learn through imitation. And we're going to kind of walk through that. And when I contextualize, it's not the only way to learn, but when I contextualize my learning in order to innovate through imitation, it makes it a lot more digestible for me to be able to approach this huge task and to start that long journey that I had. So, art through imitation. So imagine a Rembrandt with tiny little paint strokes and beautiful artwork. And you want to learn the technique on how to create beautiful art like Rembrandt. Well, one of the approaches that some of the experts take is truly just try to create your own Rembrandt. Try to mimic the strokes, try to find the right artist tools, and to try to produce the same work. Well, by virtue of you just having different hands and coming from a different time, you are not going to have the exact same work. It will never be a one-to-one replica. But in that exercise, you are now using the muscles, using the tools, and gaining the skills to become something that you've never imagined before, to become like the greats, and then you will end up creating something new and something on your own, and you will be inventing. Babies also engage in the approach of learning through imitation. There is a 2013 article that I'm citing, and I'm remembering from the top of my head, that it's always been a kind of approach where you can kind of see children mimicking you. You can pick up something and eat it slowly, and then a child will try to mimic and do the same, similar to animals. But in 2013, there was a study that was really revolutionary where we saw 14-month-old infants, and we hooked them up and we looked at the different sections of their brain, and they saw adults maybe doing an exercise with their right hand. And then in the baby's brains, you saw the right hand section, the part that represents the right hand section of their brain, would light up too, almost as if they were doing it themselves. And so that is a very similar approach to the way that we can learn. If you're seeing someone do it, it will light up kind of elements in your brain, and there's a scientific back approach to how you can learn and how that really triggers your brain to absorb that information. That's one of the reasons why I absolutely adore pair programming. So, especially whether or not you are driving or I am driving, for those who might not be familiar with what pair programming is, it's when we're both on a computer at the same time. We could be either looking over each other's shoulders, or we could be doing in a live streaming session at the same time, and you'll see someone coding at the same time as you, or you could be coding at the same time as someone else, and you'll be discussing the code as you're writing it and actually practicing that imitation approach. And also, we're doing it already. So there's two other approaches, the babies and art imitation, but Pythonic code. There's a term called Pythonic code that is idiomatic Python code, and it is code that is following the principles set out in the language, and that is through imitation. You can look at good Python code and it just feels nice. It just feels good to look at. That's Pythonic code, and it'll reinforce what we've decided amongst our community as what are the best practices for our code, and that is decided through imitation and through agreement. So let's get into specifically how do you imitate in Python. These are broad strokes and very general, but I love to look at the experts and try to mimic them on my own, and context really matters. So how widely you're going to spread this the imitation of these exercises really depends on whether or not you're going to, and how you're going to cite your source. You're really going to leverage the intention of the original author. So really, we're not going to like bite anyone's work and just recreate it as our own. But there are opportunities to see very complex conversations happening in the Python community. You can look at the event schedules and speaker schedules. You can go to python.org/events, for example, and see different speakers and follow different speakers. And then you could try to recreate some of those conversations amongst your peers. For example, even standing in the mirror and trying to redo a talk that someone else gave is going to be an exercise in trying to reproduce that artwork, trying to reproduce that Rembrandt, for example. You can also look at the release notes to open source projects. And many times that's ways that I can understand the trends of the industry. So as asynchronous Python was ramping through the industry and you're trying to understand how people have implemented that, you can look at the release notes of major projects. You can look at Django and Flask and Fast API. You'll also have well-maintained packages that you can look at, open source projects, and you can also follow discussions on discuss.python.org. And that's a good place to really find the extra experts. Discuss is where they talk about new Python proposals, and if you really wanted to get knee-deep in some of the most advanced works. So we talked about how to how to learn in order to invent, but let's talk about how to invent. What problems do we want to solve? Are you approaching it the right way? And again, is there even a right way? A lot of things go into inventing. There's having the right timing, making sure you stay curious, defining the right scope. If you're going to invent and you want to change the world, you're going to have a lane that you go in while you're defining the right scope for that. I love to focus on developer experience. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today. And then we're also going to talk about having in-depth support and mentorship and safety, but also making sure that you're amplifying your work and that you are in the center of it. So three approaches that I really want to go into today mostly, and it's just one slide on this part. But safety, this is absolutely one of my favorite research-backed anecdotes for invention. So Dr. Lisa D. Cook is an American economist who really challenged the conventional approaches on what it takes to innovate. Economists are interested in the growth of the economy, and innovation is at the center of that. And so she took the time period in the American history where slavery was happening, before, during, and after slavery. And then she also looked at patents that were filed. And surprisingly enough, you may not know this, but patents were filed by slaves who were not actually considered people. They were considered property at that time, and they still found ways to innovate and issue patents. Was not very many. But then after that, and then in the antebellum South, and then after they were recovering from slavery, there were a proliferation of patents that were filed as well. And every time there was a tragic event that happened of racism, you would see waves through the community where invention decreased. And that really underscores the point that safety and comfort are really important to being able to be in a place to innovate. You need to be able to create an environment where you are safe and can think and can iterate over your own ideas. And it sounds pretty obvious now, but this was really a new approach. They used to think only like laws would be able to be the thing that spurred innovation, but safety does as well. I focus a lot on developer experience. That's my role at Microsoft. I dotted line to VS Code. I have a lot of VS Code videos. So if you want to talk about VS Code as a developer environment, find me after this. But there is an approach in karate called katas, and this is where you practice particular movements together in order to have fluid movements. And so these are going to be small motions that you practice together in tandem in order to get very, very good at a very complicated task. And in my developer experience, like starting up my developer environment, starting up my virtual environment, I do it over and over and over again. So then now I'm focusing on the code and the problem at hand, not these little things that are part of getting started. I get to become an expert in the foundation so I can exercise my knowledge in the innovation. And also in-depth support. It's no surprise that mentorship is incredibly important, but it may surprise you to know that 75% of executives credit their work and their position to mentorship. So although we may know that we should do it together, many times because of pride or fear, we try to go it alone. Battle that feeling. You should do it together and try to find mentors, a group of mentors, not just one. It should always be a group of mentors because you should not be reliant on one person's schedule to help get you from one place to another. Very quickly, I want to kind of rough through how I plan my invention for whatever that means, but this is just kind of a more practical approach. I research where I want to get into, I do documentation, I talk to experts, and I build relationships and keep notes. I also love to set up a calendar, focus on my DX, my developer experience. I like long stretches of quiet time so I can really think. And then I celebrate every step along the way. Everywhere I get, I really want to pat myself on the back for getting an error to pass, and to adding a test into a framework, to talking to someone about it. Even the approach of just talking about what I did, I want to celebrate it because it's all very scary, and that is okay. And then last, I create. And what I create is really up to me. It changes forms all the time. Sometimes I scrap it and throw it out, but I love to create, and that's important. And I'll let you know how it turns out. And the things that let me know that I'm on the right track is that it interests me, that I have something that is popular enough where I'm able to have those conversations. If it's too niche, I won't have someone to be a feedback loop for me. And then is it solving an actual problem? And that's it for me today. That's how I invent, and I appreciate the time up here. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Another round of okay. Another round of applause for our speaker. That was awesome. Any questions? Don't be shy. We have like time for like 2 questions. You have okay. Chooks has a question, y'all. Prepare for this.
Hello, Dom.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate you. Maybe my question is a little bit related to your place of work.
Yes.
How can we get sponsorship from Microsoft next time?
You're talking to the right person. We'll be in touch. We'll try to talk about it. We'll see.
That's my concern.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll have a couple here. Okay. All right. I'm getting in my steps this morning.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Victor Jacob Asuko, and I've got to know a little bit about Microsoft. So I think Microsoft really invests heavily on talking about regulating and ensuring the safety of AI systems, talking about transparency, it is intelligibility, privacy, and security. So, what's the underlying drive for Microsoft doing this?
Yeah, I mean, so I can't speak to all of Microsoft. I can speak to AI and machine learning in general. That AI is a force multiplier. Anything that you really do with AI, it'll help you do faster and more. So if you're doing something that has out, outside effects, it'll double that, it'll triple that, it'll exponentially increase that output. So Microsoft, I can say to Microsoft has a responsible AI initiative and really making sure that good is put out into the world with the tools of Azure AI is one of their chief goals.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to ask a question. When you are inventing, I noticed that in the middle of when I start a project, in the middle of the project, I can just feel like, oh, do I really want to like continue doing this?
Yeah.
And I eventually scrap it out, and I now find a new base, and I keep on scrapping it.
Yes.
Like, how do you keep going? Like, how do you find what is really you to stop that?
Yeah, so it's about keeping up the momentum. So one of the parts that I mentioned was celebrating every step. So there is a common adage that you'll fail, I think, 1,000 times before you've reached success. But in order to reword that, I love to think that it's all just little successes getting there. You are learning more about your approach. And as long as you are figuring out, drawing from why you're scrapping it, and moving forward to the next thing, you're learning something and you're getting closer to whatever that goal is. And I really appreciate you saying that because I recently just scrapped a project and it hurt my heart. But I realized that my approach to it wasn't good, and that I have learned something in that process to scrap that project and come to something new. And for context, it was about adding a new file type to my content management system, and I went the wrong way around it, and I'm gonna go the right way around it now. So I appreciate that, but you're always learning. Was that helpful? Yeah.
Thank you. That's all time for all the questions we have. Thank you so much, Don. Another Nigerian round of applause for Don. Thank you
Thanks
so
for having me.
much. Okay, so we're gonna have 2 talks.